In 1988, the world was first introduced to a man sheathed in black, wearing an eye patch and a sword. This would be the prototype to Guts, the main character of a manga series that would publish a year later in 1989 named Berserk. Kentaro Miura, the author and illustrator of the series, would later go on to name Fist of the North Star, Conan the Barbarian, Lord of the Rings, Violence Jack, and The Rose of Versailles, along with many other pieces of media as sources of influence. Since its conception, Berserk has been one of the most influential seinen mangas in history, praised for its masterful use of dark fantasy elements and storytelling. But I'd like to sit with that for a second. You're telling me that this is just a dark fantasy and nothing more? This? As a fan of Berserk myself, I'd like to point out that the manga is more than just a dark fantasy, and what makes it so iconic are elements of cosmic horror. For the purposes of time, I'm going to assume that the viewer knows what I'm talking about when I say cosmic horror elements. If not, pause here to read. Secondly, this video is only going to examine Berserk up to the Conviction arc, but mostly remain around the Golden Age arc, and this has totally nothing to do with the fact that I haven't read the rest yet. And lastly, obvious spoiler warning for Berserk, so if you don't want to get spoiled, don't keep watching. Alright, so what is Berserk about? Trying to condense a nearly 400 chapter series is hard to do, but here's what you need to know. Guts is born, Guts suffers some more. Guts joins the band of the Hawks after losing to their leader Griffith. He suffers still, but less around them. He gets close to Griffith, he hates Casca, Casca hates him back. Griffith wants to own a kingdom, Guts tries to help him with this, realizes that he can't, leaving the band of the Hawks to become a better man for Griffith. The Skull Knight warns Guts of impending doom. Griffith tweaks out from Guts leaving and gets imprisoned and tortured by a king. Casca realizes she has a thing for Guts. Guts returns a year later. The band is half dead and starving. They decide to break Griffith out. Guts and Casca confess their love for each other. Griffith is taken back, but he's not the same as he was before. Griffith stumbles upon a behelit, starting an eclipse in which he chooses to sacrifice the entire band of the Hawks in exchange for becoming a part of the God Hand, and Guts and Casca barely escape with their lives and are forever branded with the mark of sacrifice. Got it? Great. Now let's talk about some cosmic horror elements. A prime theme in Berserk is the idea that humans are a little bit above that of insects, but not by much. There's no escape for Guts, who was born from suffering and continues to live it, and that is true for many other characters in the series. Scenes depicting war and chaos show ultimate carnage and losses of life, but we also see internal struggling among the central characters. Casca, being the only woman in Midland who is a mercenary, faces struggles and dangers that aren't true for her teammates. Griffith, upon being brutally tortured, is at his total and utter brink as he realizes that he will never be able to achieve his dreams. Either way, all of the humans in Berserk are at the total and complete mercy of higher beings called apostles. Apostles are demon-like creatures that have an unreasonable desire to cause as much suffering as possible in as many forms as possible. They maim, murder, rape, and torture by the dozens, and it almost feels like their presence is inescapable. Wild, Zod, and of course the God Hand, more on them later, are just some examples of the more powerful beings in the Berserk world. Another prominent being is the Skull Knight, an ancient being with a knowledge of the future who warns Guts about his inescapable fate. These entities come from a realm beyond the physical world called the astral world, which looks very similar to the ideas of impossible geometry that we find in works like Call of Cthulhu. And it is these entities that determine the lives of the central characters in which they are powerless to stop. Causality in Berserk is an ever-present idea that dictates human destiny and compares time to a spiral rather than a circle, citing that events are similar but not the same. It is these prime events that drive the plot of Berserk. So what I find extremely compelling about Berserk is that the awakening of its entity, Griffith, is deeply entombed with the ideas of betrayal and deception, and that the entity is a close ally and friend of Guts and a main character. Griffith will do just about anything to achieve his dream, even at the cost of lives. Many of his inner monologues express this sentiment, but it is never expressed outwardly among the other characters. Although he treats the band of the Hawks with respect and love, that's only up until their sacrifice will grant him his dreams. At that point, anything's on the table. The God Hand, Manifestations of will and evil are the overseers of the apostles and also this universe's version of angels. When Griffith activates the Crimson Behelit, which only appears to those destined to resurrect as a member of the God Hand, the band is transferred to the astral world, and Griffith is offered to be reborn out of his weakened body and live immortally among them. He takes this offer and transforms into Femto. It is in this act that hordes of apostles are set upon the band, and in which Griffith horrifically assaults Casca. Not only is everyone powerless to stop it or to even escape, as they're all trapped in this infinite realm, this moment is intertwined as the realization of deception, madness, and the awakening of Femto. Guts, Griffith, and Casca are all decidedly changed after the events of the eclipse, and from there on out, Griffith is an entity that presides over both Guts and Casca. Guts and Casca are forever branded with the mark of sacrifice, which allows apostles to come after them and kill them without any consequence whatsoever. It sends a clear message. Their life will be constant suffering until the day they die. At the end of the eclipse, when Guts and Casca are pulled out and saved by the Skull Knight and are hanging on for their dear lives, Guts awakens to a new reality. Not only does he wake up with a missing eye and arm, but when he finds Casca, he realizes that she is not the same person. Due to the traumatic events of the eclipse, Casca no longer remembers anything about her previous life, and that includes Guts. She no longer recognizes him or the love they once shared, and she has lost her ability to speak. When Guts attempts to approach her, she pulls back and screams in horror, terrified of any man coming near her. Between the loss of the Band of the Hawks, Guts' own experience, and Casca's to go with it, Guts swears to get revenge on Griffith and the rest of the God Hands, even if it kills him. And from there on out, Guts suffers with a serious identity crisis, worse than he had before. There's a quote by Skull Knight that summarizes it the best. "When you confront those who lurk in the darkness, you also envelop yourself in it." After the eclipse, there are many points in the story where Guts realizes that he's run away yet again, choosing to throw himself into revenge and forgetting to take care of the people that he claims that he loves. And as the story progresses, his trauma and anger shows up in a physical manifestation called the Beast of Darkness, which is considered something of an alter ego. And that alter ego is not unsimilar to the very apostles that he's sworn to kill, which, upon realizing this, sends Guts into despair. Between Casca's descent into madness and Guts' horrific self-discovery, there are clear cosmic horror elements that attribute to the terror that you feel when you read Berserk. But despite the many cosmic horror elements that exist in Berserk, there is a glaring question. I believe that the main reason that Berserk isn't really considered a cosmic horror is because of the story that takes place after the eclipse. Though it's true that the Golden Age arc and the eclipse are rooted in cosmic horror elements, the story thereafter is less so. The fact of the matter is that Guts can sometimes have way too much agency in the plot, and by the time we reach the present of Berserk, the story is more so about overcoming trauma, something that isn't really a trope within cosmic horror. Another huge issue about Berserk being called a cosmic horror is that it hasn't ended yet, and I fully believe that the ending will be significant in determining whether or not it's a cosmic horror, lest it be just cosmic. And though I understand that perhaps the entirety of Berserk may not have as strong of cosmic horror elements as the first few arcs, I still think it's important to view this work through a cosmic horror lens. Berserk managed to craft a story that is frankly incredible and iconic. I don't think Berserk would have been the breakout manga that it is regarded as today if not for the impact of the earlier story. When I first read Berserk, I remember feeling such an impending sense of terror and doom, and yet I couldn't put it down. And to me, that is the essence of cosmic horror. And though it's clear that Mira wasn't inspired by cosmic horror, it's still important to discuss how the success of these elements and mixing genres can redefine how we view each genre individually. The inclusion and discussion of trauma and healing from it in Berserk is something that is frankly unheard of in the cosmic horror genre, but something I welcome in the ever-changing definition of it. Many parts of Berserk maintain those cosmic horror elements while adding new perspectives in a world that is more familiar with the concepts of trauma, while also remaining relatively scary. And though I think that sometimes Berserk can stick out among the cosmic horror genre, I'd like to point out that Berserk once said, "Time is a spiral, not a circle."